Welcome to the course Guidelines for Dashboard Design. Today we are going to work with Lesson 2, Components of a Good Visualization. As seen in Lesson 1, David McCandless says that the components of a good visualization are four. First of all, the visualization must be interesting, relevant, and it must be meaningful to the user, the target audience. Second, they must have a function, usability, ease of use that allows users to interact with the visualization and search the data they need. Form, that is aesthetics, a pleasant appearance, and it must encourage the user to work with it. And above all, it must have integrity. Data must be true, consistent, and truthful, and there should not be any misinterpretations as to what is displayed. The balance between those four elements, the balance between the data that we represent and the design we use to represent it, is what yields a good visualization. As we develop a little each of these elements, as in the case of interesting, we must answer some questions during the design phase, especially at the early stages of design. First, who is my audience? Who is the target of the dashboard that I'm developing? Who is going to work with it? And in that sense, what is the data that the user needs to do their work? A dashboard aimed at a president, minister, vice minister, it is not the same as a dashboard aimed at an operational level, a local supervisor or a community. Therefore, if we know the audience and the data they need, this should mark the level of detail needed for the data in the design. It should give an answer on which decisions to make or which actions to initiate based on the information and the audience for which we are designing the dashboard. Therefore, the balance between who the audience is and what data they need is important, considering the fact that a visualization makes sense when the analysis of the data it represents is going to lead to an action that can help us solve a problem, the phenomenon being visualized in this display. Another component that McCandless invites us to consider is integrity, and this is probably the most important component considering that the truth of what we represent is essential to make good decisions. In the graph displayed here, we can see the difference between federal expenditure as a percentage of the global economy in two different US administrations, that of President Clinton and that of President Bush, and they are compared with the average under the Democratic administration over a period of a few years. And visually, it seems that there is a very big difference between President Bush and this average. But when we analyze the data, we can see that the difference is at most 4%. Since this figure corresponds to a 19% and this difference seems so big that the difference might have been considered substantial, but when we analyze the data, there is not such a difference. Why is this so? The scale, the origin of the scale has been altered. Instead of starting at 0% as it would have been correct, this graph starts at 17 and ends at 24%, with or without a malicious intent. So visual differences seem significant when, actually, they're not. To maintain integrity in a visualization, it is essential to avoid exaggerating differences by altering elements such as the origin of a scale. On the other hand, it is also important to avoid minimizing differences. This graph is more truthful in the sense that it starts at 0 and ends at 100%. And so we can see that there are actually no substantial differences between the values. Another way to alter integrity is by removing context of data. Here is a case that was highly discussed in social networks at the time, about a person who proposed that the global temperature change no longer produced any effect on the world, that it had been stabilized and there was no longer a climatic change to worry about. But in this display, he just showed a series of about 10 years. It turns out that when we analyze the same graph, not only limited to those 10 years, but we show a historical series of over 50 years, we can see that there is indeed a very strong tendency to change in the context of climate. And this is because if, instead of showing only one part of the data as he did originally, we show data from a much earlier origin, then we can see the clear tendency that becomes apparent over time. So, to keep data integrity, it is essential to always show the context in which it is developed. For example, it is not the same for a ministry to say that they have to provide care to 500 people, and of those they have provided care to 400, than to only say that they have provided care to 400 people. By not saying which is the total number of people who seek to be cared, in some cases the data could seem insignificant. Just saying 400 could seem very little or too much. But when we say 400 out of 500, the context provided to the data is what gives meaning to interpretation, and then one can tell if the data is positive or negative. Another component highlighted by McCandless is the function. The function is what allows users to work when they view the dashboard. And so, to achieve a function, which in a dashboard is always to tell a story, that function will be built based on the question one seeks to answer, plus the way in which data is viewed and, above all, the context given to the data so it can be interpreted correctly. The function is defined from several aspects, and when we work on the design, we have to make decisions on which functions we are going to provide to the user based on the audience we have and how they must use the data. So, in the function, we must design what will be the scope of the dashboard. Is it going to be a comprehensive, widely used dashboard? Will it analyze the issue from different points of view? Or is it going to be specific? Is it going to focus on a specific dimension, for example? Then we must define the role of the dashboard. Is this a strategic dashboard? Is it an operational one? Is it an analytical dashboard? What information do I want the user to find for his type of work or for the role this person performs? The display for a minister is not the same as for a supervisor of an area or for a person at the operational level or middle management. Then it should be defined whether the dashboard will have a time frame or not. In the case of a historical series, because time may be a period of time defined by the cycle of data itself. It may be 1 year, 10 years, 20 years. It also depends a lot on the historical availability of the data that I have. It could be useful to represent 10 years, but if that data does not exist, obviously I can't provide that functionality to the dashboard. Regarding time, it could only display the indicators of the previous year or of the previous period of analysis, or display the current indicators without the context of its historical series, or it could even be a predictive dashboard. This refers to managing scenarios. What if I raise the teacher's salary? What would be the budget that I should have available? If I'm going to extend the coverage of my services to 80% of the population, and right now I only provide care to 40%, which is the impact of that growth on my operating variables? And in the end, we define the use we give to the dashboard. If it is unique or customizable, if it's going to present only one vision, or if users may change and tailor the data that they are viewing to their needs through filters and parameters. Another important element is the level of detail. The level of detail shows if the data will be general or if it will be data that the user may drill down progressively. The overview may be the context of the country, the indicator calculated in its broadest spectrum for all the country. But after seeing it by country, users can decide that they want to see it by department. So this drill down, this breakdown into department levels may be a functionality that users may add to the dashboard design. And obviously, we make all these considerations before sitting down and working with the tool. It is important to note that every good dashboard does not start on a computer, but on a writing board or a sheet of paper, where we start to decide what the dashboard we are developing will be about and what it won't, what it will have and what it won't, based on the considerations we have learned in this lesson. Summing up this lesson, for a visualization to be interesting, It should always be focused on the target audience and on the data needs that we seek to meet for that audience. On the other hand, it is essential, and we have seen some examples where this is altered, that the integrity of the presented data be always protected. We must never distort the truth reflected by the data. Finally, the design requires the definition of the role of the dashboard, and we have already seen that this function has different perspectives, from the point of view of the level of disaggregation of the data, the role that the dashboard will have, and other elements we have already analyzed.